some content, but you know, life and work gets in the way. However, we are back today doing a video that a lot of the tech tubers seem to be doing this time of year when the big manufacturers release some new parts to the market, new processors, etc, etc. So we're going back and we're going to be doing a budget build. Don't like to use the word, but it is, to see what you can build and get the best bang for your buck, kind of, using some older parts. These are all, apart from one part, these are all classed as used or refurbished, and to see what kind of performance we can get for not a lot of money. So to start with, we'll go through the parts, and then we'll get on with doing a build. Then we'll do some testing and some benchmarking and see how it performs in a couple of games and see what happens. So to start with, my regular viewers will recognise this as the H500 that I bought as a clearance item because there was a part missing. It's the NZXT H500, not the H500i because it doesn't have the smart hub in it. And it had the front radiator slash fan mount missing when I bought it, and NZXT very kindly sent me one for free from their factory in America. So although it is classed as used or refurbished, it is effectively a new case. It's never been used. It's even still got the film wrap on the tempered glass side panel. So there we go. Obviously it does come with a couple of NZXT fans, one in the roof and one in the back. To that end, we will be adding a couple of Corsair 120mm case fans into that front mount for some air intake. Motherboard wise, we've gone for a Gigabyte B450M DS3H. Specifically went for the X50 chipset because I want to be overclocking this CPU, which the CPU is the baby of the Ryzen family. It is the Ryzen 3 1200. Which, while it only has a base clock of 3.1 GHz, people have had stable overclocks on this up to 4 GHz on all 4 cores. So that's what we're going to be attempting to get, or get very close to, on this overclock. So while it's only 4 cores and 4 threads, it should be you know, a little flyer when it comes to single CPU performance, single core performance on the CPU tests. Because we're overclocking it, I've actually purchased, because it comes with the Wraith Stealth cooler, I've actually purchased a separate Wraith Spire cooler, so it's a bit bigger cooling unit to help with cooling the overclocked CPU. Again, it's classed as used, but it's this was actually sold by someone who had bought the new 3600X and not wanted to use the cooler, so they sold the cooler on separately as unused. It still has the factory applied thermal paste on the bottom of the cooler. So we'll be using that to cool the CPU. RAM wise, we have 8 gig, not 16, because remember, we're on a budget. We're trying to see what performance we can get for the least amount of money, of Ballistic Sport DDR4 2400. Now yes, I know everybody's going to be screaming at me saying, but Rob, Ryzen likes fast RAM. We're on a budget, remember, so 2400, but we will overclock it. We might get around about the 2600, 2633 mark, but we'll see where we go. Now, graphics card. Everybody's going to be saying, why didn't you get a 10 series card? This is a bang for buck PC. We have gone for a EVGA GTX 960 SSC 2 gig. So the SSC, the super clocked version of the card, and this is the one with the 2nd gen fan cooling unit on it. So yeah, there we go. Outputs on that, we've got DVI, HDMI and 3 display ports. No VGA on this card because it's too good for VGA. And then finally, the only new part in the entire build is storage, because to be perfectly fair, if it's going to be a budget build, and I may well sell it on afterwards, I don't want to put a second-hand SSD in there because I don't want it to fail. So we've got a brand new Kingston A400 240 gig SATA 3 SSD. That's going to be for OS, some games and testing software. So all in, including shipping, this little lot cost just under £320, which I think is a bit of a bargain considering what you're getting. And that includes obviously the extra cooler as well, so the extra cooler is included in that money. I think this cost me just under a tenner with free shipping. There's only certain items have shipping on. Some of the items like the motherboard and the case I collected from a local supplier. I think the most expensive item that had shipping on it was the graphics card, because that had, I think it was £7 or £8 shipping on it. Everything else was like a couple of quid here and there for shipping. So that's all the parts. Like I say, shipping in total came to just under 20 quid. So the actual items themselves were just under 300 for all the parts, which I think is an absolute bargain for a Ryzen based PC. But enough of my waffling. Let's get on with the build, and then we'll do some testing. Okay, so first thing we're going to do, prep the motherboard, get the CPU and the cooler and the RAM in the motherboard, and then we'll take the motherboard out of the way, prep the case, get the motherboard in the case, do all the connections, and we'll go from there. Okay, so first things first, important things out, I/O shield. Don't need the motherboard drivers. Windows will pick all those up. Okay, so first thing we'll do is we will remove the CPU from the box that it came with. Okay, so zero in first, so we lift the lever up, exposes the socket. In this corner of the socket here is a little arrow, and we line the little arrow on the corner of the CPU up with that corner of the socket, and we just let it drop into place. Give it a little wiggle, make sure it's in place, and then with no pressure on the CPU, push the lever down and let it click into place. And that is the CPU seated. So the next thing we need to do is take our trusty Phillips screwdriver, and we need to remove these 4 screws that hold the optional cooling clamps in place. But we need to keep these screws and brackets should we ever decide we're going to sell the motherboard, because they need to go with it. So we shall actually put those in the box that the cooler comes in, out of the way. So as you can see, I don't know if the camera picks it up, we've got the 4 mounting points protruding through from the back of the motherboard, and the CPU cooler will screw down onto those. As you can see, the actual mounting poles are oblong in shape to match the oblong orientation of the motherboard. On the front of the cooler you have the AMD logo to one side. I tend to always put this facing the rear of the board, so towards the I/O panel. So we basically just drop that into place to start with, so it's sitting over the panel mounts. And then pretty much like you would do for a car engine, you don't go just round in a circle, you do corner to corner to corner to corner to even out the stress distribution, so that you don't twist the mounting of the cooler, and you don't stress one corner of the IHS on the CPU. So we'll just do a couple of turns in each corner just to get it. So we now have all 4 corners tightened down as tight as they will go. They will not go any tighter. Okay, so we look at the motherboard and we see the CPU fan plug is over here. It's not going to reach round all the way round just to try and keep the cable tidy, so we're going to have to reach around and plug it there, and then try and find a way of tidying the cable up, which will probably be going around the back of the screws like so, and just looping it around by the VRM. Okay, so it just keeps the cable top nice and tidy within the case, doesn't get anything in the way. Now, memory. We have 4 slots, 2 black, 2 grey. General rule of thumb with these boards, the 2 alternate slots furthest away from the CPU are the first 2 you use. So we flick the clips back on both sides. Make sure the RAM itself, get the camera in, has an offset slot in the middle of the PCB. This matches up with a notch in the motherboard, so the RAM will only go in one way. It is oriented to fit one way. So just make sure that you get those around the right way. Put it in perpendicular to itself, and then press until you get a snap on both ends, and that is the RAM seated. And then we'll do the same with the other one. Nice good snap both ends. So that is the RAM now seated, the CPU is seated, the motherboard is now prepped. So we will now get this out of the way and we'll start prepping the case. Okay, so here we have the case. Here we have our case fans. One thing I forgot to show you at the beginning of the video was the power supply. We have a Corsair CX750M, which is a semi-modular power supply, 750 watts, 80 plus rated. I'm not sure whether it's gold or bronze, but it is an 80 plus rated PSU. Like I say, semi-modular, so all the additional cables that come with it are plug-in, and they're all black, so I haven't got to worry about using coloured or sleeved cable extensions. The black's not going to look too bad inside the case. The only cables we're going to be using out of this are a PCIe 8-pin for the graphics card and one of the SATA cables for the SSD. Everything else will just stay in the box. So we'll put that down to one side for now, because we're not going to use that at the moment. Put the fans over there. Put the power supply down out of the way at the moment, because we are going to prep the case. So, first thing we need to do is undo this little thumb screw at the back and pop off the tempered glass side panel, which we will put down here to my right for safekeeping, so that it does not get damaged. We also really need to remove the other side panel, because we need to get to certain features on the back. So, take that out and unpick it, because one of the things we need out of here comes sat in the back, and that is all the case accessories. We also need to get all the cables that come from the front panel unbagged and separated. Now, the only cables that do come from the front panel are a front panel connector, a fan connector for the fan, sorry, no, that one's not from the top, from the front. So from the front we have front panel connector, which is a nice easy block to connect rather than all the little individual plugs. We have front HD audio for the mic and headphone jacks on the front, and a USB 3 blue plug to plug onto the motherboard. There is no USB 2 on this case at all. Although there is some USB 2 on the motherboard, the USB 2 will only be accessible from the back panel. It won't be accessible from the front. As you can see, we have the power supply shroud on the front here, which is nice. We have on the rear a clip-in, clip-out SSD mount. So the SSD will actually go around the back here. So there'll be no cables for the SSD drive going through the front of the case. Because some people do like to mount their SSDs up on the top panel here, but I like to mount mine round the back, out of the way. That way there's no inobtrusive cables sticking through the front. The only cables we're going to have coming through the front will be through the top. We will have the 8-pin PCIe, sorry, the 8-pin plug for the motherboard, and then through the side here we will have the 24 pin 80x power supply. And coming up through the bottom we will have an 8-pin PCIe going to the graphics card. So, but for right now, what I need to do is remove this front cage here and get these two Corsair fans mounted in the front panel. Okay, so we have the bracket out, we have the two fans. We're actually going to mount the fans on the inside face of the bracket, so we need to turn the fans over, and I'm putting them so that the cables kind of run together from where they come out the fans, and then we need to put the bracket on top, line up the mounting holes for the two 120s, take our fan screws, get the fan screws started in all 8 positions, and then we can kind of play around with the fan position within the bracket. Okay, so there we have it. We have the two fans mounted in the bracket. Like I say, they're on the inside of the chassis, so that when we mount it back in the case, the fans will actually be on the inside of the case rather than between the front panel and the bracket, to allow for maximum airflow, because the intake on this case is from the side of the front panel. So we want to have as much gap here, this side of the fan, to draw as much air in for cooling as we can. Hence we've mounted them on the inside of the bracket. So I'll go ahead and put this back in the case now, and that's pretty much the case prepped. And then we'll look at getting the motherboard fitted. Okay, so we're now at the point where we're going to be fitting the motherboard in the case. Now NZXT, thankfully, they automatically put all the standoffs in the case, and then smack bang in the middle of the case here we have a different kind of standoff. It has, instead of having a screw thread in it, it has a little nipple on the top. This helps you centre your motherboard into the case properly. But the first thing we have to do is fit the I/O shield. So, general rule of thumb, the three holes at the bottom of the audio, they go towards the bottom of the case, and we push it in, make sure it all snaps into place properly. So that's that fitted nice and snugly. So now we get motherboard and pop it into place. Like I say, this little nipple one here just fits it nicely into place, and then all the other standoffs should line up. However, I think we're missing one here and we're missing one here. So we'll remove the motherboard again, and we will get, out of the little bag of tricks, there's a little standoff mounting tool in here, along with a load of other sundries. It's a nice little tool that NZXT give us. Use it with thumb screw or with a screwdriver, and I think I'm going to have to use a screwdriver because they've done up a little bit too tight. So we've got our 10 standoff points in the motherboard case, in the case for the motherboard. Right, so now we can get our little bag of screws that contain all the motherboard screws and put these in. Start with the one at the back. What I tend to do is not tighten them up all the way, is I'll tighten them up so they're just catching, and then I get all the screws in, and then I'll go around and give them a quarter or a half turn, nip up, because again, same with the standoff screws, do them up too tight, they will not come out should you ever wish to remove the motherboard. I don't think that was the right screw, or it just wasn't lining up properly. So this is why we don't tighten up fully, because they may not all be lined up perfectly on the standoffs. Okay, had to do a little bit of jiggery pokery to get that last screw in, but we now have all the motherboard mounting screws in. While we're here at this point, we'll take you through a rough tour of the board. So we have obviously our RAM slots. We have two PCIe X16 slots, actually correction, PCIe X16 and an X8, and it is SLI or Crossfire ready. We also have an M.2 slot, and this is actually an NVMe PCIe M.2 slot, so it's the faster M.2 type SSDs that you can put in here. Obviously we've got front USB 2 headers, USB 3 headers, front panel headers, SATA port headers. We have our front audio is here, the old COM ports and parallel ports here. We have PCIe X1 here as well. We also have our system fan header here and an LED fan header here. So what I've realised when I was doing this build, or I had to stop, it's only got one fan header on the motherboard, and as you may have noticed, we have 4 fans in the case. So I've had to nip out to my local supplier at CCL and buy a fan hub, just so I can put all 4 fans on. It doesn't matter about the fact that they're 2 different brands of fans, because when we go into the BIOS to set it up, we're going to put quite an aggressive fan curve in to aid with cooling because of the overclock. But at this point in time, other than adding everything else in now, that is the motherboard in the case. Okay, so we have the motherboard in the case. The next thing we have to do, before we go any further, is get the power supply in with its required cables. So as I said before, we're going to need one SATA cable, and we're going to need one PCIe cable. So that's a Molex. Don't like Molex. Molex is ugly. Molex. SATA. So we have one SATA cable that we need, one PCIe cable that we need. All the rest of them, don't need those today. And as we said before, so we've got fan cables from the front, fan cable from the top of the case, and fan cable from the rear of the case. As you can see, we have quite good cable management facilities within this case. So we're going to get the power supply in. We are going to get cables fed and do a little bit of cable management as far as we can before we start getting everything else in the case. So to start with, we will get plugged into the power supply the 2 cables that we're actually going to use today, which is one SATA and one PCIe. So one peripheral and SATA, and one PCIe. So that will plug into there. So that's the 2 cables we're going to need, and then obviously we already have pre-fitted our 24-pin main ATX and our 8-pin EPS power supply for the CPU. So what we do now, just check the orientation of the screws, like that. So we feed it in from the side, and then we take our bag of large hex screws that came in the fitting case. 4 hex screws for the motherboard, for the power supply. I know some people like to use electric screwdrivers for this kind of work, but I like the manual feel. You know when it's nipped up because you can feel it in your hands, whereas with an electric screwdriver you may not get that feel, because as with anything else, with there's a small screw, with a rather fine thread on it. If you go up too hard, you'll strip the thread and you'll never get it out again. And there's the other screw hole, just there. So now we have our power supply mounted. That keeps moving. So that's now fitted in there. And we have got it fan side down because there is a removable fan dust filter in the bottom of the case to stop the fan drawing in too much dirt from the bottom. So we will now start feeding cables up through where they need to come through. So as you can see, we've got the EPS coming up and over the top here. That will get tidied up and put into the channeling around here eventually and tied it in. We've got our 24 pin coming up through the channeling. I've velcroed it in place for now. Again, the tidying up will take place once everything's in, the final cable management, and we'll time lapse video that because cable management is boring for most people. So we've got that in there. Which one's this? This is the graphics. So this will come up through this hole in the front, in the bottom of the case here, and up into the chassis. And again, because it's black cable, it's not going to look too out of place on the inside of the case through that clear tempered glass side panel. So we'll feed that one through there. And then we have our SATA, which is going to feed at the back, because like I said, we're going to put the SSD just here, so that can sit at the back at the moment. These are the fans. Right, so we have, which one's this? Front panel connector. Again, that will come up through the same hole that the PCIe is going to come up through. And we have front USB 3 and front audio, which will come up through another hole at this side, because there's a second hole. In fact, what I'll do, I will feed them behind our nice big fat 24 pin cable. Just try to keep everything as tidy as possible for the cable management. So feed that up through there. Feed that up through there, because remembering those two ports are on that side of the board, and that's pretty much it for now on that side of the case. Like I say, fan cables wise, these will all get tidied up. I'm going to try and attempt to put the fan hub just here and then run the cable from the fan hub from here up and over the top and drop, or round the back and drop down onto the PWM fan header that way. So for right now, that's the rear cable management done. Now let's start trying getting things plugged up on the front of the board. So I've got the front panel connectors done, got the front audio, the main front panel for the front headers there, and the USB 3 plugged in. As you can see, we've got the PCIe for the graphics card just hanging out the front of the case here. The only one other one I haven't done is my EPS 8 pin for the power for the CPU. So luckily they make this a nice locked in block on the Corsair plug, so rather than being a split 4 and 4, it is actually an 8 pin. So that is now plugged in, nicely clipped in place, and I can pull the excess back round to again tidy up the cable management. So the next thing we need to get in place is the graphics card, which is going to go into obviously the top PCIe slot. So we need to remove the protective plate on the back to give us access to the expansion slots. It is only just on sliders, so we just undo the thumb screws ever so slightly. Don't know why they call them thumb screws, because they're done up so tight you need a screwdriver to remove them. And then we look for the 2 slots, because remember this is a 2 slot card that run with the graphics slot. So there's the slot, so it's going to be this cover and this cover that we need to remove. I'm going to remember to keep the blanking plates, because you know, someone who has this machine, or if we strip it out again as part of another build, we may need to put one of the blanking plates back in, because the next card may only be a single slot card. So we have those out, and then we get our graphics card. So here we have our graphics card, and we'll put it into, making sure that the retaining clip is pushed back. We put it into the slot until it clips home. Then we get our 2 retaining screws. Be mindful that we need to make sure that the outputs on the back line up through the slots in the back of the case, because there's nothing worse than fitting your graphics card, tighten it all up, and then you go to put your HDMI or your DisplayPort cable in and realise it won't fit, because the socket has been half covered by that strip of metal between the expansion slots. So that's the retaining cover back in place. So now we take our PCIe cable. Now I could just use the one on the end, but I think for tidiness I'm going to use the one in the middle of the run, so I can just cable tie this one back and just keep the cable nice and straight, rather than having a big bulky item in the middle of the cable chain. So again, we clip them together, and the clip is on the bottom of the case, or bottom of the card. So now you'll notice I haven't put a SATA data cable in. It's because I do still have access, because port 1 is right at the bottom of the board, so it's accessible from underneath where the graphics card is. Now obviously we've got the twin fans on here, which will be drawing air through the shroud and back out to the back, but I'm also blowing cold air across the graphics card. So although we're going to be overclocking it, it shouldn't get too warm. We'll be able to monitor that in a CPU-Z hardware monitor to monitor the temperature of the graphics card anyway. But yeah, so what we're going to do now, just to tidy things up a little bit, I'm going to take one of the zip ties, or cable ties as we call them here in the UK, and just tidy up this cable to make it look a bit neater as it comes down and away from the graphics card. And there's my cable tie cutters. I'll just have to go and grab them. And here they are. So just cut the excess off of that cable tie. It's flipped out the back, that's not a problem. We can soon get that picked up. So, other than a SATA data cable, that is all the cables that will come into the front of the case, wired up. Oh, I tell a lie, we've got one other wire to put through the front of the case. And that is the extra item I had to go out and buy, because I didn't realise the motherboard only had one PWM fan header. So we had to go out this morning. In fact, we had to go out in the middle of shooting this video to go and get a fan hub. This is the Aerocool Project 7 P7H1 fan hub, which not only works as a fan hub, but it's also an RGB hub, which obviously we won't be using today because we're not using RGB. This is, after all, a budget build. So the only one we need to worry about is actually, I'll tell a lie, we might have to think about extra leads going in elsewhere. Yeah. Well, the fan hub itself is going to go on the back next to the SSD. Power wise, looks like we might have to use a Molex connector. I hate using Molex. So I'll get this fitted and get the fans in. I'll do the rest of my cable management and get my SSD fitted, and then we'll do a quick shot around the build and let you see it all in its glory once it's finished. So yeah. Okay, so as you can see, it's all now fitted. All the cables are in. The fan hub, believe it or not, needed 3 connections. It needed a USB connection, a Molex connection, and obviously the plugging into the PWM fan header on the motherboard. And then obviously I've plugged all 4 fans into the fan hub, which could actually take 5 fans, but obviously we're only using 4. So it's all fitted. Cable managed as best I can with all the extra cables that I had to put in from the fan hub. Would have been much easier if I'd actually been able to put them all onto fan headers on the motherboard. So we've actually got the back of the case on. So as you can see, I don't know if it's picking up too well, it's fairly tidy in there. I rerouted the PCIe power rather than coming from through the back. I came in from a hole sort of halfway across the front mesh above the PSU shroud. And I've actually had to, because of the fan hub, where I've had to put it, I've actually had to put the SSD on the clipping grill on the top of the PSU shroud rather than in the back where I originally planned. But because of how far back I've put it, you can't see the cables coming onto it. It's still quite tiny figment. So that is the machine built. Obviously I'm going to leave the side cover off while I do all the testing and stuff. I'll just now get it fired up, make sure it boots okay, and then we'll do some testing. Okay, so as you can see on screen, we've done a bit of tweaking. The maximum clock speed I managed to overclock it to was 3.8 gigahertz at 1.3 volts. I've tried it at stock and my Cinebench score was 1167. My first overclock at 1.2 volts, 3.7 gigahertz, I managed to get up to 1393. And then at my final overclock, 3.8 at 1.3 volts, it was 1424. The package temps didn't get any higher on the 3.8 overclocked than 54 degrees, and it idles at anywhere between 28 and 30 degrees. As you can see on screen now, it's idling there. Max speed was 3.8 gigahertz. I did try a 3.9 gigahertz clock at 1.35 volts and it just kept crashing. So on the Silicon Lottery, I didn't think I did too bad getting a 3.8 volt overclock out of a CPU that's only supposed to boost to 3.4 on one core, and the rest of them were supposed to run at 3.1 gigahertz. So all in all, a successful overclock. Couldn't get Heaven to run. It was the usual DLL file missing, and even when I installed the C++ file, it still wouldn't run. So there we go. I know for a fact that those are higher scores than I ever got on my 1600 Ryzen 5 processor. Even though that had 6 cores, they were all running at well below 3.8 gigahertz, so the actual overall score was a lot lower on that processor. So there we have it. Well, thanks for watching, folks. Hope this has proved that you can still build a relatively good PC on a bit of a budget. Like I say, it would have been, including shipping, just under 320, but as I said in the video, I had to go out and get a fan hub, which cost me nearly a tenner. It is an AeroCool one, so you know you expect to pay those sort of prices. So again, that was the second new part in this build. But then, just for just under £330, take off some shipping, it's just under 310. And I think we've got a good PC. Like I say, the Cinebench scores, you know, prove that it's a good machine. I haven't got time to run some game tests on it because it's now 2:30 and I've got things to do before I have to go out at about 20 to 5. So I've got to tie this off and get this video edited and uploaded. As always, if you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button, hit the bell to get notified for the next video. Hopefully it won't be 2.5 to 3 months before the next one goes up. And as always, we'll see you in the next one.